Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this webinar to gain insights about research and entrepreneurship. This event is co-organized by NTU Institute of Advanced Studies, the School of Chemical and Biomedical Engineering Graduate Students Club, and the School of Electrical and Electronic Engineering Graduate Students Club. My name is Aditi, and I will be your host for this webinar. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and the link will be sent to you when it is ready. You can raise questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will have the Q&A segment after the speaker's presentation. The topic of today's webinar is From Research to Entrepreneurship by Dr. Kelvin Yong, a startup consultant and entrepreneurship mentor, as well as our NTU engineering alumnus. Before I call upon the speaker, let's take a short pause and have a poll quiz to start this morning discussion. Okay, we have mixed students, undergraduate, graduate. I can see a lot of students. Okay. And mostly think that entrepreneurship is very important for success, but let's wait till the end of the poll results. So I guess all of you can see the poll results on your screen. So 75% of the students are graduates in the seminar. Okay, good to know. And yeah, almost more than half the students think that research is very important for the success of entrepreneurship. Okay, and the winner in the uh, in what is required for successful entrepreneurship, mostly people think that it's creativity followed by strong vision and resourcefulness. Okay, so let's continue with this webinar. So with that, let me introduce our speaker, Dr. Kelvin Yong. Dr. Yong is a lecturer at the School of Chemical and Biomedical Engineering, NTU, since 2013. His courses include Introduction to Multidisciplinary Engineering, Engineering Mathematics, Decision Tools for Engineering Business, and Introduction to Data Science and AI. He earned his PhD in EEE from NTU in 2010 and began his career as a research fellow. In 2011, he was a co-founder and chief technology officer for an IoT company. He left the IoT company in 2015 to focus on edutech. He is also a consultant and advisor to early stage startups and mentor to university students in entrepreneurship. He is currently working on edutech products, which are still in the development stage. Without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Yong to share his insights and experiences on his interesting journey from research to entrepreneurship. Over to you, Dr. Yong.
Thank you, Aditi. So let me just share my screen. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you to attend my talk today. Right, I'm from the poll. It's very interesting. I assume most of you are graduates, and some of you could be from other sectors, and also lecturer, right, or faculty. Okay, today my topic is from research to entrepreneurship. From a person who is doing research, right, 10 years ago, I ventured into entrepreneurship. So I think it's good to share some of the information I gathered over the years and my journey as well, the experiences, so that some of you who might want to venture into entrepreneurship might have an idea what it's all about. Okay, so these are the topics that I'm going to talk about today. First, of course, I will just talk about what's the difference between entrepreneurship and research. Then the structure of a startup, the very fundamental blocks, then the possible technical roles that you can find in the startup. And also I will try to answer the three main questions that most of you might have in your mind. Is research really critical in entrepreneurship? Is research or entrepreneurship, which one is more important in the startup? And can entrepreneurship and research actually coexist in the startup? And then finally, I will leave most of the time actually for Q&A because that is the most important session that I felt in this talk. Okay, so entrepreneurship and research. For research, I will talk about research first, since most of you are graduates. Research as you know, right, while we are doing research in lab, in the university or in the other research institute, such as the A-Star, we are really focused on theoretical based kind of things, right? And we focus on novelty. That's how you get your paper published, that sort of things in good journals, right? So that's high level research. And we did a lot of all this in the labs, so on and so forth. For the other pillar for research is what I call research and development. This is what you usually found in startup, in companies, because we tend to do a lot of research around the product, around the technology, do a lot of market research, and try to integrate whatever we can in the technology to fuse them with the market demand and create the product to be sold to the customer so that we can generate the revenue for the companies. So R&D is more towards the company, and high-level research is really more towards the lab, whereby the focus is on novelty and R&D is on market demand. So for entrepreneurship, right, it's really nothing but just activities that you take the risk with the objective to make profit for the company. The profit is not so much to make big money, right? I think this is a misconception in a lot of people that whereby you can make a lot of money for entrepreneurship. Actually, it's not. It's just to make profit in order to sustain the company. Why we have to sustain the company? So that the company can live long enough for your innovation to carry on and hopefully eventually meet the objectives of what is the entrepreneurship or what is your startup all about, right? So it does not help if your company just fail after 3 months, 6 months, after you use up all the money. So you still need some kind of revenue and profit to sustain the company. So these are the two main differences between entrepreneurship and research. So how about the fundamental blocks of a startup? First, you start with an idea, right? You may have some ideas over some chat in the coffee shop, or now COVID-19, so over some kind of online chat, right? With your friends, with your colleagues. And then you talk to a few very interested individuals. And not all those individuals that you spoke to will want to bring this forward, right? So only a selected few who have a core interest in the idea and want to form a team. So at this moment, when you form a team, it's still very informal. It's just a team, right? And what the team do is actually to have more in-depth discussion, more in-depth research of the topic, ask around, read a lot, that kind of thing, to equip themselves with as many information, as much information, as much knowledge as possible. So when they are ready, then they think that they are ready to take the plunge. The keyword is take the plunge, right? Because you need to commit, right? You will start to register a company, and then you have to legalize it. You have to do a lot of formalities, that sort of things. And usually it's during this phase, when you set up the company, then the two groups of people will come on board. First, if you're lucky enough, you have investors, what we call the investors. Before you actually set up the company, actually they already try to sort of understand what you're trying to do. Not only trying to understand your idea, but they also want to take a look at your team, right? What's the setup? Okay, so the setup is very important, right, as a team. Okay, so they actually emphasize a lot what's in the team. So this is actually quite surprising for some of you, right? Because the idea is seriously not as interesting as a team. So if the team made up of very experienced people, made up of even students or graduates who have a lot of experience in the area what they are trying to do, their passion, the sort of things, then they will invest money into that team and hence the company, right? And investors usually that come on board, they will take a board seat, right? They take a board seat in the board because obviously because they invest the money, they must make sure that the company is running well, right? So they need to be so-called a mentor to it. Okay, another group of people is what we call the advisors or the mentors. So this group of people actually, they will come in. And why they come in? They come in because they're interested in what the company is doing. So usually they come in as a volunteer basis, right? They do not ask for money. They do not ask for shares. They just come in and they want to provide the expertise and help the company to do well in their product. Eventually, of course, when the company grow bigger, then maybe the company will compensate them with some kind of shares, that sort of things. But at the early stage, no, it's really strictly just volunteer basis. And they're more than happy because it's something that's related to them, it's of interest to them. So they have their own so-called criteria to help the company or not. Then, of course, if the product that the company is trying to offer involves some kind of novelty, then you need to partner with some kind of research institute, which is the RI, or the Institute of Higher Learning, NTU, NUS, and other universities, okay, to collaborate some of their work in the lab and see whether you can scale down into a product that is marketable. Because we agree, most of the prototypes that we build in the lab are not commercialized, so they are not ready to be sold to the market, right? So if the company saw a need to do this, they will collaborate, and then eventually they will go and R&D, scale down the prototype in the lab and create a minimum viable product. That's what we call the MVP, right? Minimum viable product is something that is sort of not commercialized yet, not ready yet, but it's so-called tuned to the market requirement. So we will have some iteration and some improvement based on the feedback of beta testers, early users, that sort of things. And then the whole entire process is what we call the product development, which later I will talk more about the activities in another slides. Then finally, you will have products, you have services. That is the final version to be rolled out, to be launched. And hopefully those services, products can generate revenue for the company. All right, so these are the whole fundamental blocks of startup. For most of the startup, okay, some of the startup may have a unique kind of blocks, but these are the fundamental ones that mostly you will see is like this, right? The whole flow of it. So next, let's talk about the possible roles, right? Technical roles that you can find in a startup. Okay, for the very first one, you could be one of those individuals that pitch the idea, that talk about the idea, and form the core team, right? So you are known as the co-founder. You co-founded the company, or if you are the only one, then you're the founder, right? So after which you start the company, right? And as the company grow bigger, right, grow more, with more people being recruited in, then not only are you a co-founder, you will be possibly the CTO, right? The CTO is actually in charge of all technical aspects of the company, the technical strategy, the technical vision, and very importantly, how to gel the technical capabilities of the company with the market demand, with the market vision, with the financial vision, with the business vision of the CEO. So the CEO and the CTO have to gel very closely together, right? In the event of any unhappiness between these two, for example, or they have different views or they are at loggerheads, very likely the startup will not succeed, right? Because the team, at the end of the day, if you take a look at my slides here, I put it right in the middle of the slides. Do you notice that? Because it's the heart of everything. If the team break down, startup, no matter how good is your idea, you will just fall out. I'm sure this is common knowledge to you if you see some of the news out there with some of the very promising startups. What is the outcome, right? The demise of this startup, right? So please bear in mind with that. So this is what happened. This possible role number one is what happened to me while I founded a company a couple of years ago. So I was a co-founder, and then later I was being promoted or elevated to CTO. Another role, right, is what we call the advisor mentor, right? So this one is usually you are a professor, you are a senior lecturer, you are a senior scientist in NTU, NUS, or any other research institution, Institute of Higher Learning, that sort of things. And you are there when you go to a conference, when you go to a seminar, you happen to know this company that's doing some very interesting work that's related to your research, that's very related to your area. So you want to contribute. You want to also, at the same time, follow the progress. So what can be better than just getting involved with the company in terms of advising, right, to follow the progress? So usually, like I said, they are on volunteer basis. So they don't usually get anything from the company, but they just provide the expertise and help them out, right? So these are the mentor advisor, the second possible role. The third possible role is, of course, as a scientist, right? In a A-star, in the NTU, NUS, the sort of things, whereby you involve in the collaboration work between the institute and the company, if the collaboration is required, right? Because not all industry require this part, right? Like I mentioned before, unless the product requires some kind of novelty, you need this collaboration. If your product do not need novelty, then you do not. Later I'll explain more on the later slides. Next is the possible role number 4, right? Is as a product manager. So product manager is very hands-on, as you can see in this manner. There's no strategic planning, there's no collaboration kind of activities, but it's strictly to convert the MVP into a product that's good enough to be launched. And this, if you ask me, is a very critical role because it's very important. The product that's being finalized and eventually roll out has to be as close to what the market actually wants as possible. Otherwise, the outcome will not be favorable and the company eventually will also go down, right? Okay, so all these are the 4 different possible technical roles that you can find in the startup. So that next time in future, if you want to look for a job, if you saw a startup you're interested in and you are not so sure which kind of role you can sign up for, so maybe this can give you some information about it, right? And one more thing, don't think that you're just a graduate, fresh graduate, and you're not capable to be a CTO. No, there's no such thing. So as long as you have the passion, you have the knowledge, you have the experience, and you have the drive, you can give it a try. And that's what happened to me. Okay, next, technical activities within a startup. So I've talked about the possible roles, technical possible roles in a startup. So maybe it's good for me to also elaborate a bit on the technical activities. So first, like I mentioned, if you are a scientist in the research institute, then you will of course collaborate with the startup. On the company, on the startup point of view, you are somebody in the startup, and like for example, the CTO, then if you need to collaborate with the Institute of Higher Learning, what should you do? So the activities usually what the CTO do or the technical team do is they actually will study and investigate all the current relevant technologies from all the research institute and the IHL. Okay, then they will select a few. Now, this is very important because for a startup, you have limited resources. You cannot expect to take everything that you find out there and then try to do something like it. No, usually what we do is we actually narrow down and pick up only 1 or 2, right? At most only 2, right? Usually we just pick 1, okay? That's very relevant and suitable, and we will concentrate and focus our limited resources to that area, okay? If the product that we want to offer requires novelty, right? Remember, it's only if it requires novelty. If it does not, then we don't need this portion. So after which, we are interested in the particular tech that we want to license. So we do, again, all the formalities. We have to license from the institute. We have to, of course, communicate closely with the people from the IHL or the RI, right? Then we work closely together. So this is something that I want to explain further. Okay, what we do is after licensing, we will so-called scale down what we have in the lab, the prototype. Because in the lab, because of novelty, that's their core objective, research in the labs. You will expect the prototype to be fully spec'd. That means they will go to the extreme, they will test all the limits, that sort of things. But not all these specs and features are required in the market, right? So customers are very simple. They just want to use what is useful for them. They will not use all the specs. They will not use all the features. So the work of the team, the CTO and the team, is they need to scale down based on what they understand from what the market wants, right? So that's what we call the minimum viable product. Why is it minimum viable product? Because it's something that it cannot be released yet, but it's something that's very close to that kind of product. So it's a minimum viable product, right? And this minimum viable product, like I mentioned, is often a scale down of what you have in the lab. Okay, of course, the next one is to, again, perform a few iterations, like I mentioned just now, a lot of testing, a lot of feedbacks from the customer. So this is something that a lot of startups I noticed, right? Even during my time, we do not really have the luxury to do this. But actually, those who have performed the full testing of this MVP, as many iterations as possible. When I say as many iterations as possible, what do I mean by that? Is when the funding of the company is able to sustain them long enough to do this process. Because if the company has no money, it's very difficult to keep on going through this route, right? Because before you're done with it, your company already has run out of money, right? So this process, right, the team actually have to be very prudent. Okay, when is the right time to release the product? At the same time, it must give some iteration to improve the product, to make sure that the quality of the final version is good enough to eventually generate revenue for the company to move on. Of course, you may say that investment money can come in, that sort of things, but later I'll explain in another slides that investment money is not always there, right? You have to meet certain criteria, and there's a lot of condition, and it's not so straightforward. Okay, so you cannot just depend on investment money. Okay, so these are the main activities, tech activities within a startup. Of course, these are I narrow down this to technical activities. There are many more others, business activities, that sort of things within a startup. So now, let's come to the first question. Is research really critical in entrepreneurship? Okay, let me just recap Entrepreneurship is about the activity to take risks to make profit, right? In order to sustain the company. Research is divided into two pillars: high-level research and R&D. Right? High-level research means the collaboration with the institute, and R&D means that you scale down the prototype and develop into a product that is of market demand, right? So now let's take a look. High-level research, right, depends on industry, like I mentioned just now. Most important, the thing is if novelty is required, right? If, for example, I wanted to integrate all the IoT system together to maybe take data from the environment, okay, and then after which I will store the data into a server, and after which I will sell the data, for example, right? So this is a very simple project, okay, related to smart cities, related to IoT. So in this sense, I do not need novelty because everything is matured. The hardware is matured, the server is matured, all the coding is matured, software is matured, right, so to speak. So I don't need any novelty. So in this case, I do not need to collaborate actually to any other research institute. You can just integrate from the market to build the system and up is running, and then sell the service and the platform. On the other hand, okay, for the same example, on top of it, if I need to employ some form of AI, artificial intelligence, to do some out of the world kind of computation or processors in order to sell my product even better, yes, this layer you need high-level research collaboration. So in other words, for a particular product that you offer, it can be divided into different layers, right? So some layers require high-level research collaboration, some layers do not. So you have to really, as a CTO, you really have to make a decision which one you require high-level research. Why is this so? Because again, startup, we always have limited resources. We are always operating in an environment whereby we do not have the luxuries to spend a lot on a lot of things. So we are very prudent in spending. So the resources has to be used in a useful manner as well. So if high-level research is not required, we will not do it. If it's required, of course, we have to do it, right? So that is a lot of decisions and also risk-taking. When I mean risk-taking, it's not like gambling. It's not like going to a casino to gamble. That's not the risk I'm talking about. The risk I'm talking about in entrepreneurship is making decisions whereby you do not know the outcome. And that's obvious. Entrepreneurship, if you know all answers, then you will not be entrepreneurship. You will be a sure win businessman, right, so to speak, okay? So entrepreneurship, the exciting part of it is you do not know the outcome of each of your decisions. But what you can do is to make sure that the outcome is best to what you expect it to be. So you try to increase the odds, you try to increase the success, right, of your risk decisions. Okay, so all these things, this is just to show you, this is just one part of it, whereby the CTO and the team and the company as a whole have to make a decision whether high-level research is required or not, okay, for all layers or for different layers, right? So R&D is, like I said, is vital because it really scale down the prototype and develop the technology into a product that is demanded by the market. And when this happens, the better you do this, the more people are willing to buy your products, and finally, of course, generate revenue for the company to sustain the company. So R&D, yes, is vital. High-level research may or may not be necessary, right? So another question, is research more important than entrepreneurship? I think by now you should know through my previous few slides the answer for this question, all right? So let's take a look. Entrepreneurship is vital. Why? Because it's an activity to take risks in order to sustain the company, to make profit, right? So entrepreneurship is always the most critical. And what about research, right? Research, like I said, the two pillars, high-level research may or may not be necessary. R&D is vital. And vital for what? To develop the product so that the company can sell the product effectively, right? So in other words, entrepreneurship is the most critical, and research is a critical, or rather is an important element in entrepreneurship in order for the company to innovate and to produce the product that's very relevant to the market, but yet have room for innovation moving up the ladder, right? So again, as I put over here, my 2 points, never ever depend strictly only on investment money. Investment money, yes, they are good. They can only, they can extend your runway, right? They can, what do I mean by runway? That means the survival of the company, that's the runway. Okay, they can extend the runway of the company, but they cannot always be guaranteed to be on time, the investment, right? And you need to spend a lot of effort to pitch your ideas. You need to spend a lot of time to talk to people, right? To network. Okay, so, and you know, in a startup, there's only a few of you, right? So if the time is being allocated to talk about pitching, then you may not have the time to really do your product and your service. Okay, that sort of thing. So there must be a balance. So investment money is a good to have, definitely, but it's not something that you should depend strictly on the survival of the company. Okay, so investment money is so risky. I'm not going to talk about what is the risk, right, of taking investment money. I mean, different people have different interpretation of this, right, and different people have different experience. Okay, but obviously you know that the only key elements how to sustain a company is really the growth of the company in terms of sales, in terms of revenues, because that's the only thing that the team can control. Investment money, how you cannot control what other investment think about your product, about your company, but you can control how you can produce your product, and you can control how you can market your product, and eventually control the sales, right? So that's very important. So I hope in my audience I have some VCs or some investors. Later you can ask me a Q&A on this. Okay, so for the last question, right? Can entrepreneurship and research actually coexist? So obviously the answer is yes, right? And I mentioned just now. But the key idea is how are you going to balance them? Why I say so? Because if there's too much entrepreneurship and there's no research, okay, what will happen, right? So what we will do is the company will only focus on making money, will only focus on profit, but there's no innovation. So yes, for the first version of the product, you are able to sell like hotcake, the product, but you are not able to go further. For example, iPhone, right? iPhone 1, if Apple at the time stopped at iPhone 1, the innovation, today they will have go bust, right? They cannot fight with Samsung, they cannot fight with other handphone maker, Huawei, okay, that's all companies, right? So you need also some kind of research in order to innovate your product for version 2, version 3, version 4 for future growth of the company. You cannot just be stagnant. One thing about startup or a company is you cannot be stagnant. You must always move, right? It must be dynamic. It cannot be static. So it's very important. And on the other hand, if there's too much research, you know, some company, because I mean, I saw one company the founders are all scientists, so they're so engrossed in the product, in the technical advancement of the product they want to offer. So they have a lot in research being thrown down to the product, but actually the product they offer or they want to sell do not really need much. They need some novelty, but do not really need that much novelty. So they spend a lot of money on research, but eventually the company run out of money and they go bust. Because they are always depending on investment money to come in to think that their product is, the technical advancement is very great, and then they are hoping that the investment can come in, right? The investor will invest money, but for some reason the investors are not interested, right? So that is a very sad outcome for them. The research is very good, but it's not ready for market. Sometimes you may hear about this quote, right? You may be too ahead of your time, right? This is very true. You must remember, for entrepreneurship, it's about activities to take risks to seek profit. And where does this profit come from? It's from your customers, it's from the market. So if your product is too ahead of the time, whereby the people do not appreciate how to use or appreciate your product at that moment, you're bound to fail as well, right? So my advice for you for this is, if you think that your research is too ahead of your time, you can still work on it, but whether to release it at the time to the market, then you have to think twice, right, about it. Okay, so I come to the end of the talk, but before I end off and go to a Q&A session, right? So let me give some conclusion, right? So for research and entrepreneurship, okay, actually these two are both similar and different, right? Like I said, the difference you know by now in my slides. Entrepreneurship is about taking risks to get profit in order to sustain a company, so that you can, of course, move on to your innovation further down the road. For research, is really, right, to investigate deeply on a particular subject, so that you can get a lot of knowledge of a particular subject and the novelty in it, and where to go hopefully to no man has gone before in that subject, right? So these two are different in that aspect, but they are same also in the aspect that both need determination, right? You cannot stop halfway, right? You have to be determined, and both require passion, right? You need to be passionate about research. Likewise, entrepreneurship, you need to be passionate about what you are trying to sell, the product, right? You have to believe in your research. You also have to believe in your product, okay? Otherwise, you will not be successful with either, right? So you have to have a passion, you have to believe in those things that you're doing for both research and entrepreneurship, okay? And let me just end off with a quote from our late founding father, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, right? He said this: "I do not yet know of a man who became a leader as a result of having undergone a leadership course." So likewise, for entrepreneurship, right? You do not learn how to become an entrepreneur from learning from a course. You cannot be an entrepreneur by just taking entrepreneurship course, right? But what the course can do is to get you prepared, and that's all, right? You need to go through the entrepreneurship yourself, the journey yourself, and the very first thing that you need to take the risk is to take the plunge to be an entrepreneur, right? In order to understand the journey, the ups and downs, it's not always up, right? In fact, if you ask me, most of it is down, right? You need to know how to take those decisions. You need to make critical decisions. You need to overcome those challenges, and finally, right, you reach your goal, hopefully, okay? So it's the process that is the most exciting and enjoyable, rather than the outcome, although the outcome, it may or may not be what you want in the outcome, right? So that's actually basically about entrepreneurship, right? So with that, I end my talk, right? And thank you everyone for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yong, for the very informative session indeed. And now let's just get started with the question and answer session. So we have received quite a number of questions during the registration stage itself. And there is one interesting question from Kit Yu. The question is, Dr. Yong, did you always know that you wanted to start a business? And was it like tough to learn the entrepreneurial and business skill sets, considering your studies were mostly in engineering?
Okay, so actually, you asked me, I never expected to start a company. For me, it just come about when we have an idea and we think that it's interesting and we want to do something about it and we want more people to know about it. That's why we start out. My engineering skill set, right, does help in the starting out because it's on the technical aspect. So, but actually, very few people actually want to actually do startup just because they aim to do startup. It's just that something drives them to want to bring the things that they know, the idea that they are very interested in to the next level. That's why they do the startup.
Right. So the next question is from Pamela Cheng, who would like to hear more about your take on multidisciplinary engineering.
Okay, so that subject is a subject offered by SCBE, School of Chemical and Biomedical Engineering in NTU. So it's a multidiscipline subject whereby we taught SCBE students with EEE fundamental principles. Right? So I think that subject is very, if you ask me, my personal opinion is very important. Because nowadays you notice you do not just work alone as a single discipline engineer, right? So you go and talk to your colleague. Very high chance that you have a colleague who are from the electrical background, who are doing electrical elements of the company. Even in startup, if you want to do a project, electrical engineers are usually there, right? For today in today context, and electrical who are doing IT work as well. So that subject actually gives SCB students some knowledge, fundamental knowledge, to converse effectively with their fellow colleagues. So I think it's a good thing. Right? You put them in good position to understand and, of course, eventually contribute better to the company moving forward.
Right. So the next, we have a question from Vijesh. Vijesh, we have given you some audio privilege and you can unmute. You have been unmuted and you can ask your question live.
Yes, Dr. Young, is taking risk one of the key elements for a successful entrepreneur? And what are the different ways and options in hand for raising fund for your venture?
Okay, the first question, like I mentioned just now, taking risks is not like gambling, right? It's really making decisions, okay, whereby you do not know really 100% what is the outcome. So yes, taking risks involve being confident in your decisions making, and based on the experience that you have, hopefully the decisions will, I mean, the outcome will work in your favor. So taking risks is an important element in for the success of entrepreneurship, because if you don't take risks, right, then obviously most of the decisions you only depend on you, unless you're 100% sure of the outcome, then you take the decision. Then this will definitely hinder the growth of the company. And like some people say, right, I mean, if you don't take risks, you will not venture into something that all that all people want to go, right? So most of people will not want to take risks in that portion, for example, but you are the one who taking risks to go into that area to make that decision. So if the outcome works in your favor, then obviously you will get all the advantage from it, right? So taking risks, yes, it does help for a successful entrepreneurship journey. And for the second questions, okay, about the different funding methods, right? For example, okay, I think for funding, there's many ways. From what I understand, right, on one end you may have some friends who have a bit of money who wanted to invest, right? So these people usually are what we call the angel investors. So they are interested in your product, of course, and then they have a little bit of money to spare, and they want to put in your company to see it grow, of course, in exchange for shares. So this is one group whereby you can easily talk to some of these friends, right? Angel investors. Another group on the other side of the board is what we call the venture capitalists, the VCs, right? So VCs, I do not need to talk more about them. I'm sure all of you know about them, right? VCs is really more professionals in a way. So they have a kind of yardstick to gauge whether to invest or not in that company. So sometimes different VCs have different criteria, of course. Some take a look at whether the company has the potential of growth. Some take a look at the later stage startup whereby it's really making revenue and see whether they can make even more progress, that sort of things. So VCs are another group whereby you can raise fund, you can pitch your ideas to them. And in the middle of this board is what we call the incubators, right? Incubators usually are those that work with some of the governments, whereby the funding, there's some collaboration between them and the government. And this group of people are actually one that they want to nurture the startup. So if they see some companies or some startup is able to grow beyond the first stage, then they also will come in. And even for some startup, they think that the idea is not so good, but the team is good, they will also come in and they try to help the team to improve on the ideas, for example. Right? So there are many, these are the three main ways that you can raise funds. Which one you think is best for you? I think at the end of the day, the founders or the co-founders have to ask themselves which group of these investors they are most comfortable to work with. I think that's the most important, because chemistry within the team is critical. Chemistry between the team and the investors are critical as well, okay, for the survival of the company. Okay.
Thank you, Rajesh. Next, we have a question from Wen Hao. You have been unmuted. Can you please ask your question?
Hi, Dr. Yong. I'm from CBE. Are there any common skills or capability for a successful researcher and entrepreneur? Thanks.
Okay, for common skills, right? I think skills, if you are talking about having a technical role, right, in the entrepreneurship journey, or in the research, I think the most important thing is you don't mention about technical skills, because that's a must that you have, but definitely you need to have the ingredients. What are the ingredients? The ingredients is the very first most ingredient is that you need to have passion. Like I said just now, you need to have passion. You need to love what you are doing. You need to have passion about the topic, about the product. So in both research and in entrepreneurship, you have to believe in your product. You have to believe in research. Then you will succeed. So just now I saw the poll, very interesting, right? I mean, you all say, most of the audience say that creativity is the number one important thing about research and entrepreneurship. Actually, it's not. It's actually passion. Think about it. If you have passion, will you not have creativity? If you have passion, will you not have drive yourself to know more, to want to know more, and to think more? Creativity is about thinking more, correct or not? So if you have passion, you will do all sorts of things. So the key thing is passion. And of course, if you have passion, you have determination. Everything just come along, right? So main thing is passion. On the other hand, if you do not like a particular topic, then you are being forced to do that research topic. And then if you don't like to do a product and you're being forced to go into a startup, that sort of things, in that kind of situation, obviously none of the above will happen, right? Those you are not determined to go through. You do not have the creativity, all that kind of thing, because you're just not interested, right? So the main thing is passion, all right?
Thank you, Venha. We have a lot of questions in our Q&A. So the first question being, can one start entrepreneurship when they are more than 30 years old?
Well, that's a very good question, all right? So I think entrepreneurship, okay, so let me just rephrase this question to the broader sense. When is a good time to start entrepreneurship, right? So I think there's really no age limit. Some people start entrepreneurship at 65 years old, right? When they are all retired, the children grow up, the grandson grow up, and they have plenty of time and they just want to use their expertise in the area, right, in the industry to do some business, to do some entrepreneurship activities, right? So it's really not, there's no age limit. The main thing is, when are you ready? I think the main question is, when are you ready to take the plunge? I give an example. If you are a fresh graduate, I mean, after you did a PhD, for example, you pass your thesis, you got a PhD, and you are not interested to go into research, for example, and then you are thinking whether to find a full-time job or not, or work as a postdoc and eventually assistant prof, right, along that route. Okay, or you are interested in and then you are interested in a particular topic, right, and you think that your research can move on to a commercialized world. Then again, the situation of this person in the family is that he need to feed the family. He need to have a full income, right? He need to have stable income, put it that way, to feed the family. So he cannot go into entrepreneurship, because we must understand entrepreneurship is about bootstrapping. That means you must expect no income at the start, at least, right? And then of course, eventually you try to raise funds, and luckily enough, if you have some people who fund you, then you may have some form of salary, right? But definitely for the first few months, that sort of things, the true startup, right? Or rather, you should not be getting a lot of money at the beginning, right? Because you're just very fresh product, fresh company. So nobody will actually throw in a lot of money in your company. So you expect the financial earnings will be very minimal, or at least none at all. Okay, or none at all. So in this kind of situation, then of course this person cannot go into entrepreneurship. He has to work first, right, to have a steady income to feed the family and some things. On the other hand, if another person, right, do not need to feed the family, let's say he came from a wealthy family, right, is well-to-do, he does not need to have those financial commitment, for example, right, then yes, he can just jump into entrepreneurship even without getting a pay. So I think these scenarios, these case studies only tell us one thing: when are you ready? Okay, ready not in the sense of the technology, ready not in the sense of your knowledge, because those can be picked up actually along the way. Decisions can be done along the way, because nobody can train you how to make decisions. You must be involved first, right? But ready as in whether you are willing to take the plunge and make sure that you are able to go through the journey without having to give up halfway. And one of the most disadvantage of being in the startup is, for a start, you will have no income or very little income, right? Okay, so that is more of when you are ready. So there's no age limit. Okay, when you want to do, if you want to do an entrepreneur journey, right?
The next question we have is, should universities introduce entrepreneurship in their curriculum?
Yes, I think the university should still introduce entrepreneurship or curriculum. Okay, this is to prepare the students, okay, for such a journey. You cannot teach them to become entrepreneur from your courses, but you can prepare them for entrepreneurship by giving them some theories, some case studies, by letting them know that this is what happened. But knowing what happened and experiencing it, what happened, are two different things. But it's better to knowing how it happened than not knowing at all when you actually face the problem. In other words, we are increasing the chances of the students to actually avoid pitfall when they encounter one in entrepreneurship if they take those courses in the university. But of course, I need to point out that those courses have to be in such a way that you need an experienced entrepreneur or somebody that go through it before in order to release those statements better compared to someone who has not, right? Because even in the context of a course, it can be in the form of a case study and sharing session, okay, from the so-called a person who has did entrepreneurship before. So that will be very helpful, but it cannot replace the person actually doing entrepreneurship, right? Because he or she need to go through the experience himself or herself.
Right. So we have an interesting question. It says, since investors often care about exits, how do you think entrepreneurs can manage to be effective while simultaneously thinking about such exits? It's like getting into a marriage with a divorce plan from day one.
Yes, actually, this is a good question. That's right. This is what I just now said, that there's some risk when you want to take investment money. I mean, investors, there's nothing wrong for them to want to exit because they are like the term suggested is investment. So they need to make good about their investment, right? This is very true. So like I mentioned just now, the founders or the company management, they have to make decisions. They have to judge for themselves. Again, take risks, right? Make decisions to judge for themselves which group of investors they think they can gel with, they can work closely with. Some investors, if they really like the team, they will not mind holding off the exit duration. That means they do not mind holding off the exit first. That means they will keep on following the company, give them more time to grow, more time to actually to come up with their visions, know the product, the sort of thing, and they do not really hinder, right, the growth of the company that much. And finally, they will exit when the management are comfortable with it, that sort of thing. So it's really, at the end of the day, VCs or investors, they are also human beings, right? So if you communicate well with them, if they understand, if they really see the true essence of what the company is trying to do, then obviously they will be in your favor. They will not go against you, right? Because it's not in their interest, right? They also want to exit with when they want to exit, they also want to exit when the company is doing well. They don't want to exit when the company is going bust, right? For example, they get nothing or close to nothing. Okay, so at the end of the day, you need to take risks to see which group, see very carefully which group of investors. Do some background research about them. It's not only them doing research on you, you should do research on them. In fact, you should do a lot of research on them, right? It's not that they choose you only, you have to choose them as well, right? Be brave about that theory. Don't only just think that they choose you, you have to choose them as well, okay? Especially so now there are so many VCs, there's so many investors out there, so you have the luxury to choose, okay? That's why I say you only go into entrepreneurship when you're ready. Do not be held ransom by the fact that you need money. That's very important, because if you do that, then obviously all the terms, even if you accept money from the VCs or the investors, is in their favor and it's not in your favor. So you must be in a position whereby you're strong enough in your product, you're strong enough in your own commitment, right, and your own readiness before you talk to those potential investors to come in. Okay, don't start at the beginning. Start when you have something. Then that give you more terms to be in your favor in order to get the investment in.
The next question is, a startup's journey is not always smooth sailing. How should startups find the balance between R&D and entrepreneurship when they hit a wall?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. A startup's journey is not always smooth sailing. So how should startups find the balance between R&D and entrepreneurship when they hit a wall?
Okay, so when they hit a wall, that means you are saying that if the startup they hit a wall, right, it's not smooth sailing, what should they do? Am I right?
Yes, that's
Okay.
right.
Yeah. So I think this is not to discourage you or any one of you in the audience to do away from entrepreneurship, but you have to be mentally prepared. Entrepreneurship, these kind of scenarios will always come out. In fact, every day it will come out. Because why? You will not know whether tomorrow the company will have progress. Okay, don't talk about making money first or making a product, whether is there a progress in the startup. And on the other hand, you are burning money, right? You need expenses, right? To run a startup. So this question is a daily question. So you need to be mentally strong in order to overcome this. Okay, so really depends at the end of the day, it depends on how passionate you are, and another thing is how ready you are to be involved in this. So if you are passionate enough, if you are ready enough, you are committed enough, right, then you will just go through it. You will not stop there. You will not give up. You will not think about what should you do if this fail, right? You will just keep on pushing for answers. You will keep on pushing for the right way until eventually you see a light in that tunnel, in that startup. Of course, this is easier said than done, right? And most people fail, right? And it's natural, right? To be frank, most people fail and it's natural. And we are all human beings. Sometimes if you really cannot take it, you have to just give up and go back to your full-time job or that sort. There's nothing wrong with that. Actually, you need to make a decision as an individual, as a team, as a company, right? So it really depends on how committed, how passionate, how ready the individuals are in the startup when you meet some of these challenges.
Right. This question is based on your personal experience. So the attendee asks, can you share your personal experience on what you would have done differently or really glad you did along your journey? Secondly, what are the biggest challenges and advantages of having a startup in Singapore? Is it finding the right people, support from government, etc.?
Okay, for the first question, can I share my personal experience or what I would have done differently?
Yeah.
I think for me, not saying that I started off on a bad footing in terms of my team, but I think if I can have a second try, I will want to get to know my initial team members more first, right? Before embarking on the journey. Because like I mentioned, the team is the most important element, not the idea. I used to have the misconception that idea is the most important over the team, right? But I was so wrong. Okay, so the team is actually the most important. Not saying that the individuals are bad or good, but what I'm trying to say is the team members must gel together in terms of the mindset, in terms of the bottom line, in terms of the mentality, in terms of the way of doing things. It's okay to have differences in terms of how to execute certain things, but at the very end, the principles must be aligned, right? The mentality must be aligned. So you cannot have one founder saying that this is acceptable and another founder say that this is not acceptable. Then what will happen, right? So there will be a disastrous, right? There will be a chaos in the startup and there will be disastrous, and the company and the startup will not progress even if you have a great idea, right? So if I have a second chance at that time, I will want to know about my team members more first before I take the plunge. Okay, so another question is, what is the biggest challenges and advantages of having a startup in Singapore? Is it finding the right people, etc., right? Support from government. Okay, I think let's start with advantages. Advantages to do a startup in Singapore is not, if you ask me, it's not the support from the government. In fact, I hope the government don't give so much support. By giving a lot of support to the startup, they will be financially sound, even if they are not market ready. So this is something that may affect their decision making, or rather the appetite of risk or risk taking, right? Because you have plenty of funding, you do not need to take risks. You can just sit on the funding and then just move slowly, right? Not taking risks. But we have seen in many cases, successful startup actually is from when people are going to go bust, right? Or when they're in a situation whereby they cannot survive, they have no choice but to push forward, and they have to force themselves to go to taking desperate measures to really do a breakthrough, right? To think of some innovation, to think of some creativity, how to sell the product, that sort of things. It's only when in extreme time, these founders are able to find a way. Of course, not all, right? But some, right, did that. As compared to somebody who are very relaxed, right, in the environment, okay, which I think, right, is not that good, right, for startup, okay. So that is not the advantage, okay, for a lot of support from the government. Although I appreciate what the government have done, okay, for the startup, it's a good thing, okay, for the whole startup scene, right. But you need to know whether it's really good for you as a company, as a startup at that stage. Different stages of the startup will appreciate differently from the support from the government. That's what I'm trying to say. Some will appreciate better, some will not appreciate that much. Okay, so the advantage I would think in startup is, yes, you'll find good people because most of the people are educated here. They are technically inclined. They can converse a lot more than 2 languages or more than 1 languages, right? Most of them. So it helps them to communicate with a lot of different customers, that sort of thing. So I think it's the people, yes. In the infrastructure, Singapore is a small country, so there's a lot of things can be done easily, and of course, most importantly, we have a very efficient government. We have a very efficient set of policies. We have a very efficient and effective legal framework. So everything you do in a startup is all protected. It's all listed black and white. It's very clear cut. There's no ambiguity, for example, right? So you can feel safe starting up something in Singapore, right? Okay, so that's the advantages, that I think the main advantages. The challenges is that Singapore is a very small market. It's really a very small market. I think this is common knowledge. Singapore is a very small market. So you cannot just depend on Singapore market in order to be sustainable, right, so to speak. So that's why you see a lot of startups actually venture out of Singapore. They go into Southeast Asia, they go into Asia, they go into US, China, right, that sort of things, right? So that is the only challenges. But now I think these challenges is getting smaller because the power of internet, right? We can cross boundary without any much restriction, right? So that's the market size is something that you have to take note, okay, when you want to sustain your company eventually, right?
Right. So the next question is actually closely related to the first part of the previous question. It says that in startups, it is often seen that there is some lagging in defining scopes and responsibilities and improper ratio of high-level research and product development. Have you encountered this issue? Is there any specific way to minimize it?
Okay, yes, this is a common issue because in a startup, it's not very structured, right? It's not very structured like a company. It's not very structured. There's no structure, you asked me initially. So when you do a startup, the good and bad things about startup is there's no structure. Good thing is you can do things very fast. You can just get those founders together, have a meeting, decide, execute the decision, and that's it. You move on. In a company that's very structured, you need to meet the manager, then the general manager, then the director, then the CEO, and so on and so forth. So many people have to come together and talk to each other, that sort of thing. So good and bad, right? When there's no structure initially for a startup. Okay, so yes, it may appear a little bit messy, right? For some, like for example, how do you define high-level research and how do you define R&D? But all these things don't come into place initially. These things are what we call planning, right? Initially, when you do a planning, right? So the responsibility actually lies in the team themselves. They have to be disciplined, right? Even if it's a non-structured environment, they need to be disciplined. In my case, we actually do some recording. We actually are very structured in terms of our planning, in terms of our organization. So all things are very properly listed out, properly organized. Even having said so, there may be some element of messiness, but it's kept to a minimum. So I think the key thing is continue to be disciplined, right? To be organized, even if the environment is not structured. So when the company grow later on, right? When the company start to grow, when your investors' money come in, you're able to recruit more people. Then you will have people that's assigned to all this organization of the files, organization of what is being said, taking minutes, that sort of thing, a lot of things, right? And that's when it's the right time also to consider, right? What are the activities that's needed, right, for R&D? What are the activities that's needed for high-level research? Okay, for the start, doing a startup, the best you can do in terms of the product itself is just one person or 2 person doing the product. And it's not even a minimum viable product, it's just a prototype. It's something that you can use to pitch to your investors, but it's not something that you can release to your beta testers, for example, right? So there must be a step-by-step progress. You cannot just jump straight away, right? So, so that is the key thing, is try to be as disciplined as you can, even if you are in a startup, when you're doing all this kind of planning. Yep. Any more questions?
Yeah, there is actually one more question.
Okay.
So this one says, statistically, how much entropy and friction do investors impose in serious STEM, bio, and financial engineering entrepreneurships? What percentage of investors turn out to be low quality time wasters and lovers of fluffy pitching at the expense of technical meritocracy?
Okay, it's quite a long question. Which one? Can I scroll down to the question? Can I take a look?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, never mind. Can you just repeat the question again? So let me just understand clearer about the question.
Yeah, so the attendee is trying to ask that how much entropy and friction do investors impose? I mean, what percentage of the investors turn out to be just low quality time wasters and they just want very fluffy pitching?
Okay, so you mean doing the pitching of the ideas, right? So what's the percentage of the VCs or the investors are just serious about it, or just sitting there and listen?
Yes.
Okay, so I think, like I said, it boils down to the previous things that I said just now. If you are in a scenario whereby you are ready to raise fund, whereby you have something to show, and your product is really reached to a stage whereby it's of interest, it's interesting, and have some sound basis in it, then you get to choose your investors. You can broadcast, you can send email to some of those that you did research in, those investors that you read a lot about them, right? And ask them whether they're interested to meet up and then hear the company pitch. So in that kind of scenario, obviously there's absolutely no chance that the investors who attended are those that's wasting time. So all those investors are definitely the one that's interested in your company, in your product. So this kind of scenario is the best because you're only attracting those investors who mean business, right? Who mean business. Okay. So on the other hand, another scenario, if you are not ready, right, but you just need money to fund your company, then you go to those seminars or those talks or some events whereby you are there are a number of you, and then you are given 5 minutes to pitch your ideas, that sort of things, right? I think this is common. I think some of you saw that before. Then yes, I cannot say there's some what's the percentage per se of those that's not interested, but you have to be realistic. Some of them are there for different kind of startup they are looking for, right? They may not be interested in your kind. So during that moment, then obviously they'll switch off, right? So it's very hard to say what's the percentage that's interested or not interested. It's just that in that kind of scenario, you are just one of the mass kind of companies that wish to pitch an idea, and those investors out there are only interested in the ones that they are looking for, the thing they are looking for. So if you happen not to be part of what they are looking for, obviously they'll switch off. So better to be in the first scenario than the second. And this is something that I think during my time, right, we fail to do that. We are in the middle, sort of. We are not in the first scenario, we are not in the second scenario, but we are in the middle, right? So the outcome is not that favorable as well, in a way, right? So I think it's best to do it in a way whereby you can be in the first scenario. Then definitely, right, the investors that eventually come on board will be a big plus to the company, rather than somebody that you need to handle every month, offer some report, and then be very stressful about the results to them, right? So this one you have to be very prudent.
Right. Another very common question that is being asked by the attendees is, as a PhD student who wants to move to entrepreneurship after graduation, how to find investors to support me? Because I think that funding is an issue for most people.
Okay, so from what I understand from the question is, you are a PhD student, you graduate, and then instead of wanting to do research more, you want to do an entrepreneur. You want to be an entrepreneur, and you really want to, I assume that you really want to extend your research to the commercialized world, right? That means it's not something you want to do that is not related to your research. I assume that it's something related to your research. Okay, so let me put it this way. This is scenario 1. Okay, there's something that's related to research. And scenario 2, when there's something that's not related to research. Okay, for the first scenario, when something is related to research, I think the very first person you should talk to is your supervisor, right? Your professor who is doing the research with you. Because professors, they have a lot of context. Along the years, there are a lot of context, and some could be from the commercial world, right? So if you're interested to bring this research to the next level, have a talk with your professor, see whether he has context. That's the very important thing, because at the end of the day, whether is it in any other circumstances, you need people to be comfortable with you in order to even hear about your pitching, right? So what's the best way to be comfortable is when he get to know you through somebody he knows, right? So that's very simple, through networking. Okay, so of course, if that scenario is not possible, that means let's say a professor has no context, then what should you do? Then they have no choice. You have to really attend those a lot of those talks that whereby the investors organize some events, right? Then you can go and take a look, that sort of things. But like I said, don't jump into it. When you want to to commercialize your research, how confident you are that your product, your prototype can actually go into a commercialized product, right? So you have to have all these answers. If it's very close, yes, there's a good chance the investors will take a look and then maybe start from there. But if it's a big gap between your prototype and something to reach to the commercial world, then it's a big issue. Right? Then you should be realistic enough not to jump right in. So in that kind of scenario, maybe you can look for a few people to be part of your team by selling your ideas first, and then move from there. See what should you do after that, because these different people could be a CEO from a successful exit startup, and he's very interested in your technical prototype and wish to start a company with you, that sort of thing. So you never know. So I think the key thing is to start to network after that. Don't think that do not jump right in. For the second scenario, whereby it's not related to your research, and you just want to have a reader from research and then go into entrepreneurship, then you have to ask yourself what skill set you have to contribute in the startup. Okay, that means something that's not your prototype, but something that you learn based on your knowledge from your PhD thesis. This knowledge, can it be applied to something? So in this case, obviously, just like what I mentioned just now, the first row, to be a CTO eventually, right? So what kind of startup, okay, you are interested in? You should not start up yourself. You should have a team. No, I think to start up with one person is very risky, because first of all, you do not have a ball to bounce off the ideas with. So everything is you and your decision alone. So it's very risky. So you need somebody in the team to actually discuss and have wider angles. And at the end of the day, is taking decisions that increase your chances, right? So you have more diversity of people in your team, the better chance that you have out there compared to just one person. Right? Don't worry about the shares of the company. Don't worry about all those things. All those things eventually will come to nothing if your company fails, right? So let me give you an example. A very successful startup, eventually, even if you only have 5%, that's a lot of money, right? As compared to a startup whereby you have 100% of the shares, but you go bust, that's nothing. You're worth nothing, right? So if you want to talk about concern about shares, that kind of thing, then you should not be worried about that at the beginning stage. What you should be worried is whether you can negotiate with the eventual people that comes in, the investors, the team member that comes in. If you are the CEO, whether you still have the controlling power, but you don't do it through shares ratio. You do it through your capabilities to convince them that you're capable to do that. All right. Okay. So did I answer the question? Right, for the two?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
So before ending the session, I would like to ask you another question about IP. So how important is the knowledge of intellectual property rights when a researcher is starting into entrepreneurship?
Okay, so IPs, right, like I mentioned just now, when your product and the services that you offer involve novelty, that means the first of its kind and something that people have never done before in certain processes, platforms, then IPs are very important because it gives you protection, right, against potential future competitors, and also not against only competitors but collaborators, whereby you have a set of IP rights and you can be in a better position to negotiate the terms and conditions for when you talk to potential collaborators. So that's when your product and services that you offer involve some kind of novelty. But on the other hand, if your product and services does not involve any kind of novelty, it's just integration work, then selling a service, or maybe a platform, for example, a platform to sell something, or to sell a service, that sort of things, then IP is redundant, seriously, because you cannot protect anything, because there are only a certain limit whereby IP are able to give you protection with. IPs are specifically to protect against people who copycat your procedures, your processes, your technological findings, whereby you pour in a lot of resources into your research, for example, an R&D. So that is when IP is the most critical, most important, right? But of course, having said that, most of the companies, what they do is the common practice is, even regardless whether it's novelty or not, they just file for the IP rights, right? So this one again is depend on judgment of the management. If the company have additional resources to do this, some companies have, some companies do not have. But if you ask me, which kind of circumstances whereby IPs really are important and needed is only when your platform has some form of novelty, right? And then you need to protect against, and whereby you have spent a lot of resources into your novelty, then you need to protect it, obviously. Okay.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Yong. So with that, we come to the end of our session. And I would also like to thank all the attendees who've sent in their questions. For those whose questions were not answered, we will email you the response from Dr. Yong after the webinar. Thank you once again to Dr. Kelvin Yong for taking his time amid his busy schedule to join us in today's webinar. And thank you all for being a wonderful audience and participating in this event. Before you leave the webinar, do scan the QR code for the survey and attendance form. We value your feedback to help us improve in future webinars. Meanwhile, stay well and stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you.